Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Ryan Mitchell had built his life like he built everything else, methodically, with precision and an unforgiving attention to detail. At 42, he owned Mitchell Construction, a company that had grown from a one-man operation into the most sought-after luxury home builder in Millbrook County. His hands, scarred from years of manual labor before success found him, now signed contracts worth millions. The Mitchell family lived in a testament to Ryan's craftsmanship, a sprawling colonial mansion he designed and built himself on 15 acres of pristine land. Every beam, every tile, every fixture had been chosen with care. It was meant to be their forever home, a legacy for their son Tyler. Lisa Mitchell moved through their perfect house like a ghost of her former self. Once, she'd been the fierce paralegal who'd fought alongside Ryan when contractors tried to cheat him in his early days. Now, at 38, she spent her days at the country club, maintaining friendships with women who'd never worked a day in their lives. The transition from struggle to success had changed her, though Ryan had been too busy building their empire to notice when exactly she'd stopped being his partner and started being just another beautiful accessory in their perfect life. Tyler, their 15-year-old son, had inherited Ryan's sharp mind and Lisa's stunning features. He excelled in school, played varsity soccer, and had never given his parents a moment's trouble. Yet lately, Ryan noticed the boy seemed nervous around his mother, especially when Brad Coleman was around. Brad Coleman. The name left a bitter taste in Ryan's mouth even before he knew the truth. At 35, Brad was everything Ryan had never been: polished, Ivy League educated, born into wealth rather than building it from nothing. He'd moved to Millbrook 6 months ago, claiming he wanted to escape the stress of Manhattan corporate life. Brad had inherited enough money to live comfortably without working, spending his days at the country club and his nights attending every social gathering in their affluent community. Ryan had initially dismissed Brad as another rich playboy, harmless and forgettable. But Brad had a predatory intelligence hidden beneath his charming smile. He identified Lisa's loneliness, her resentment at being sidelined from Ryan's business success, her nostalgic yearning for excitement. Brad didn't just seduce Lisa. He studied her, manipulated her, made her believe that Ryan's dedication to their family security was actually neglect. The signs had been there for months. Lisa's new workout schedule that conveniently coincided with Brad's gym hours. Her sudden interest in wine tastings and art gallery openings, events Brad frequented. The way she'd light up when Brad's name was mentioned, then quickly mask her enthusiasm. Her phone, which had once been casually left around the house, now permanently attached to her hand. But Ryan had been focused on the biggest contract of his career, designing and building an exclusive resort community. The project would cement his company's reputation and secure Tyler's college fund, but it demanded 16-hour days and constant travel for site inspections. What Ryan didn't know was that Lisa and Brad's affair had escalated beyond secret meetings. They'd begun discussing their future together, and Tyler had become an obstacle in their twisted romance. The boy had started asking uncomfortable questions, noticing Brad's frequent presence when Ryan was away. Lisa, consumed by her passion and Brad's manipulation, had begun to see her own son as a threat to her happiness. The evening everything changed started like any other. Ryan returned from a 3-day site visit to find the house unusually quiet. Lisa claimed Tyler was at soccer practice, but something felt off. Tyler's gear was still in the mudroom, and practice had been canceled due to rain, a fact Ryan discovered when he called the coach. When Tyler finally came home near midnight, limping and with a bruise darkening his jaw, Lisa's explanation was smooth and immediate. Tyler had been riding his bike and taken a spill. But Ryan knew his son, knew that Tyler was too careful and experienced a cyclist for such an accident. More telling was Tyler's behavior. He wouldn't meet his father's eyes and flinched when Lisa tried to touch his shoulder. That night, Ryan lay awake listening to Lisa's even breathing beside him, her phone buzzing with texts she'd answer in the bathroom. For the first time in months, he really looked at his wife, noticing details he'd missed in his exhaustion. The new jewelry she claimed was a gift from her sister. The expensive perfume that wasn't the scent he'd bought her for their anniversary. The way she'd started working out obsessively, transforming her body with an intensity that suggested she was performing for someone. Ryan had built his success on his ability to see problems before they became disasters, to anticipate structural weaknesses and reinforce them. As he stared at the ceiling that night, he realized his marriage had developed cracks he'd been too busy to notice, and now those cracks were threatening to bring down everything he'd built. He'd always lived by a simple code. Loyalty earned loyalty, and betrayal earned consequences. In business, contractors who tried to cheat him found themselves blacklisted throughout the industry. Suppliers who delivered substandard materials never received another contract. Ryan didn't believe in second chances when trust was broken. It was a weakness that invited further exploitation. What Ryan didn't yet understand was that his wife and her lover had already crossed lines that would demand the kind of justice the legal system couldn't provide. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. The next morning brought an unsettling normalcy. Lisa hummed while making breakfast, her mood inexplicably bright despite Tyler's obvious discomfort. She peppered their son with questions about school, his upcoming soccer tryouts, his plans with friends, all while Tyler responded in monosyllables, never quite looking at her directly. Ryan watched this performance over his coffee, his contractor's eye noting every false beam in Lisa's cheerful facade. When she announced she'd be spending the day shopping with her friend Monica, Ryan made a decision that would change everything. "Tyler," he said after Lisa left, "want to help me with the Riverside project today? I could use someone to check measurements." Tyler's relief was palpable. Away from the house, away from Lisa's watchful presence, the boy gradually relaxed. They worked in comfortable silence for an hour before Ryan broached the subject carefully. "That's quite a bruise you've got there. You sure you want to tell me it came from a bike accident?" Tyler's hands stilled on the measuring tape. "Dad, Son, I've been building things since before you were born. I know the difference between accident damage and impact damage. That bruise on your jaw, someone hit you." The story that emerged made Ryan's blood run cold. Tyler had come home early from school the previous day with a fever, expecting to find the house empty. Instead, he discovered Lisa and Brad together in the living room. Ryan's living room, on the furniture Ryan had chosen, beneath family photos Ryan had hung. Tyler had tried to leave quietly, but Brad had spotted him. What followed wasn't just an affair discovered, but something far more sinister. Brad had cornered Tyler, his charming mask slipping to reveal something predatory underneath. When Tyler threatened to tell his father, Brad had struck him, hard enough to knock the 15-year-old to the ground. But Lisa's reaction was what truly chilled Ryan to the bone. Instead of protecting her son, she'd sided with Brad, helping to craft the story about the bike accident. She'd looked her injured child in the eye and demanded his silence, threatening to send him to military school if he told his father the truth. "Dad," Tyler whispered, his voice breaking, "I don't think Mom loves us anymore." Ryan pulled his son close, feeling a rage building inside him unlike anything he'd ever experienced. In that moment, every ruthless instinct that had carried him from poverty to success crystallized into a singular focus. Lisa and Brad had made the most fatal mistake possible. They'd threatened his child. That evening, Ryan began his investigation in earnest. He hired Derek Torres, a private investigator he'd used for background checks on major clients. Derek was a former police detective who'd left the force after refusing to look the other way on corruption. He understood men like Ryan, men who built empires through sheer will and protected them with absolute ruthlessness. The initial surveillance report arrived within days. Brad Coleman wasn't just some rich dilettante seeking thrills in a small town. He'd been expelled from 3 private schools for bullying younger students and had a sealed juvenile record that Derek's contacts couldn't access, but could confirm existed. His family money came with strings, a trust fund that could be revoked if he brought scandal to the family name. More damning was the timeline Derek established. Lisa and Brad's affair had been going on for 4 months, not the few weeks Ryan had suspected. They'd been methodical in their deception, using Lisa's country club activities as cover while they planned what Derek's sources suggested was more than just a casual fling. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening 2 weeks later. Ryan returned from a client dinner to find Tyler sitting on the front porch steps, his left wrist swollen and cradled against his chest. "What happened?" Ryan demanded, his voice deadly calm. Tyler's explanation was halting, punctuated by glances toward the house where voices could be heard arguing behind closed windows. Tyler had interrupted another of Lisa and Brad's afternoon encounters, this time in Ryan's study. When the boy had protested their presence in his father's private space, Brad had grabbed his wrist and twisted it, threatening far worse if Tyler didn't learn to mind his own business. Lisa had once again chosen Brad's side, telling Tyler he was being dramatic and that he should be grateful Brad was willing to be a positive male influence in his life while Ryan was so often absent. Ryan examined his son's wrist with hands that trembled with barely controlled fury. Not broken, but badly sprained. He sent Tyler to his room, then walked into his house like a stranger surveying enemy territory. He found Lisa and Brad in the kitchen, sharing a bottle of wine that Ryan recognized as a vintage he'd been saving for his and Lisa's 20th anniversary. They were laughing, their intimacy casual and comfortable in a way that spoke of long familiarity. "Ryan," Lisa's surprise seemed genuine. "You're home early." Brad stood slowly, his posture subtly challenging. "Ryan, good to see you. Lisa was just telling me about Tyler's little accident. Kids, you know, always getting into scrapes." Ryan looked at this man who'd struck his child, who'd invaded his home, who'd stolen his wife and corrupted her into something unrecognizable. He thought of Tyler upstairs, nursing an injury inflicted by a coward who preyed on children. "Brad," Ryan said, his voice conversational, "I think it's time you left." Something flickered in Brad's eyes, surprise that his presence was being challenged, irritation at being dismissed. "Actually, Lisa invited me for dinner. I think I'll stay." The silence that followed was electric. Lisa looked between the two men, sensing the shift in dynamics, but not understanding its source. Brad seemed to realize he'd miscalculated, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Ryan smiled, and Lisa later said it was the most terrifying expression she'd ever seen on her husband's face. "No," Ryan said quietly, "you won't." That night, after Brad had left and Lisa had retreated to the guest bedroom following a bitter argument, Ryan sat in his study planning the most important project of his life. He'd built a construction empire by understanding that every structure needed a solid foundation and that weak materials had to be removed before they could cause catastrophic failure. His marriage was beyond repair. The foundation had been rotted out by betrayal. But he would ensure that when it came down, he'd be the one controlling the demolition. Chapter 3. The Blueprint. The emergency room call came 3 weeks later, exactly as Ryan had anticipated. Lisa's voice was shrill with panic, claiming Tyler had been hurt in an accident at home. But Ryan knew better. He'd been tracking every move Brad and Lisa made, every lie they told, every escalation in their increasingly reckless behavior. Derek's surveillance had revealed a disturbing pattern. Brad's interactions with Tyler had grown more aggressive, more controlling. He'd begun treating the boy like an obstacle to be removed rather than a child to be tolerated. Lisa, completely under Brad's influence, had started viewing her own son as an impediment to her happiness. The accident had been inevitable. Tyler had discovered Lisa taking money from Ryan's home safe, money intended for Tyler's college fund, to finance an upcoming weekend getaway with Brad. When Tyler threatened to tell his father, the confrontation had turned physical. Ryan had prepared for this moment. He'd installed hidden cameras throughout the house weeks earlier, disguised as routine security upgrades that Lisa had barely noticed. Every violent encounter, every threat against Tyler, every moment of Lisa choosing her lover over her son had been recorded in high definition. At the hospital, the scene played out exactly as Ryan had orchestrated. When Lisa tried to bar him from Tyler's room, claiming their son didn't want to see him, the nurse's intervention was perfect timing. Tyler's desperate plea for his father, his whispered revelation about Lisa and Brad's abuse, and Ryan's call to the police were all witnessed by hospital staff who would later testify to the family's dynamics. But Ryan's real masterstroke was what he'd done before arriving at the hospital. While Lisa and Brad had been dealing with Tyler's injuries, Ryan had been downloading every surveillance video, every recorded conversation, every piece of evidence Derek had gathered. He'd also made strategic phone calls to Brad's family trustees in New York, to Lisa's employment lawyer's sister who'd always disapproved of the marriage, and to certain members of the country club board who prized reputation above all else. As the police took statements and Tyler received treatment for his injuries, a concussion and severely bruised ribs, Ryan watched Lisa realize her world was collapsing. Brad, faced with potential assault charges against a minor, immediately began distancing himself from both Lisa and the situation. His polished facade cracked under police questioning, revealing the entitled coward underneath. But this was only the beginning of Ryan's revenge. He'd spent 3 weeks building a trap with the same meticulous planning he brought to his most complex construction projects. Every beam was precisely placed, every support carefully calculated to create maximum damage when the structure finally collapsed. Within hours of the police reports being filed, Brad received a call from his family's legal team. The trust fund that supported his lifestyle came with morality clauses that his assault of a minor had violated. His monthly allowance was immediately suspended pending a full investigation. Lisa found herself being questioned not just by police, but by Child Protective Services, who'd been alerted to the pattern of abuse by an anonymous tip that included detailed evidence of her negligence and complicity. The photographs Derek had taken showed bruises on Tyler spanning several weeks, documented proof that this wasn't an isolated incident. By the time Lisa and Brad realized they were being systematically destroyed, Ryan was already 3 moves ahead. He'd retained the best family law attorney in the state, a woman known for her ruthless advocacy for abused children. He'd had Lisa's financial access to their accounts frozen, citing the theft from Tyler's college fund as grounds for emergency protective measures. But Ryan's cruelest stroke was psychological. He'd arranged for surveillance footage of Lisa and Brad's most intimate moments to be accidentally discovered by Lisa's conservative mother during what should have been a routine visit to check on Tyler. The resulting family scandal would ensure Lisa's social and financial support network crumbled just when she needed it most. As Ryan sat in Tyler's hospital room, watching his son sleep peacefully for the first time in months, he felt the satisfaction of a job well done. But this was only the demolition phase. The real construction of his revenge was just beginning. Lisa and Brad had thought they were playing a game of deception and manipulation with a distracted workaholic. They'd failed to understand that Ryan Mitchell didn't just build structures. He built systematic destruction for those who betrayed him. And unlike the quick collapse of a controlled demolition, Ryan's revenge would be a slow, methodical dismantling that would leave his enemies with nothing but regret and the bitter knowledge that they'd brought their destruction upon themselves. In the hallway outside Tyler's room, Lisa sat in a plastic chair, her designer clothes wrinkled, her perfectly styled hair disheveled, finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd unleashed. Brad was nowhere to be found. He'd fled as soon as the police finished their initial questioning, his loyalty lasting exactly as long as it took for real consequences to appear. Ryan looked at his wife through the window, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. She'd made her choice when she'd chosen her lover over their son. Now she would live with the consequences of that choice for the rest of her life. The foundation of their family had been corrupted beyond repair. But from its ruins, Ryan would build something stronger. A life where Tyler never had to fear the people who should have protected him, where loyalty was rewarded and betrayal was punished without mercy. He'd learned long ago that some structures couldn't be renovated. Sometimes, the only option was complete demolition and starting fresh. Lisa and Brad were about to discover that Ryan Mitchell built his revenge the same way he built everything else, to last forever. Chapter 4. The Siege. The week following Tyler's hospitalization became a masterclass in systematic destruction. Ryan had returned to work with the focused intensity his employees recognized as his war mode, the same energy he brought to impossible deadlines and hostile takeovers. But this time, his target wasn't a construction project or business rival. This time, He was dismantling two lives with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of executioner. Brad Coleman discovered the first phase of his destruction when he arrived at the Millbrook Country Club for his usual morning workout. The desk attendant, a young woman who'd always greeted him with flirtatious smiles, now refused to meet his eyes as she informed him his membership had been suspended pending review of recent legal complications. The board had acted swiftly once Ryan's carefully orchestrated whisper campaign reached the right ears. Country club memberships in Millbrook weren't just about golf and tennis. They were about reputation, social standing, and the kind of network connections that kept wealthy families wealthy. Brad's assault of a 15-year-old boy, combined with his affair with a married member's wife, had violated every unwritten rule of their insular community. But losing his social anchor was nothing compared to what awaited Brad at his rented estate. Ryan had discovered that Brad's lease was month to month, and his landlord, a wealthy widow named Eleanor Hartwell, was a close friend of Tyler's grandmother. A single conversation with Mrs. Hartwell, including selected surveillance photos of Brad and Lisa's activities in her pristine guest house, had resulted in an immediate eviction notice. Brad's trust fund lawyers called that afternoon with devastating news. The morality clauses in his inheritance weren't just about criminal charges. They extended to any behavior that brought public shame to the Coleman family name. With local media beginning to pick up the story of the construction magnate's son being assaulted by his mother's lover, Brad's monthly allowance was permanently terminated. For a man who'd never worked a day in his life, who'd lived entirely on family money since graduating college, the financial reality hit like a sledgehammer. Without his trust fund, he couldn't afford his lifestyle, his rent, even his luxury car payments. Within 72 hours, Brad Coleman went from wealthy playboy to effectively homeless and unemployed. But Ryan's assault on Brad was only beginning. Derek Torres had spent weeks mapping Brad's life, identifying every weakness, every dependency, every source of comfort and security. The private investigator's military background had taught him that true victory came not from a single devastating blow, but from sustained pressure that broken enemies will to fight. The second wave of destruction targeted Brad's few remaining assets. His luxury SUV, it turned out, was leased through a company that prioritized clients with sterling moral character. His insurance, auto, health, and personal liability had clauses that allowed for cancellation following criminal charges. His credit cards, all backed by his now-frozen trust fund, were systematically canceled. Ryan had even arranged for Brad's gym membership, his only remaining social outlet, to be revoked. The gym owner owed Ryan's construction company a favor. Mitchell Construction had built the facility at cost after the owner's previous contractor had gone bankrupt mid-project. When Ryan explained that Brad had assaulted his son, the membership cancellation was immediate and permanent. Meanwhile, Lisa faced her own systematic destruction. Ryan's lawyers had moved with frightening efficiency, freezing all joint accounts and credit cards, pending the outcome of Tyler's Protective Services investigation. Lisa discovered she couldn't access the money she'd grown accustomed to spending freely, couldn't charge her shopping expeditions or spa treatments, couldn't even pay for gas without Ryan's explicit approval. The social isolation was even more devastating. Lisa's carefully cultivated friendships were built on status and mutual benefit, relationships that evaporated the moment her position became uncertain. Women who'd gossiped with her over tennis lunches now avoided her calls. Charity organizations quietly removed her from their boards. Even her weekly hair appointment was canceled when her credit card was declined, and the salon owner, another of Ryan's grateful clients, refused to extend credit. But Ryan's cruelest innovation was denying Lisa access to Tyler. The boy was staying with Ryan's sister Rebecca while recovering from his injuries, and Child Protective Services had granted Ryan temporary sole custody pending their investigation. Lisa could see her son only during supervised visits, and only if Tyler agreed to the meeting. Tyler, finally free from his mother's manipulative influence, had found his voice. During his interview with social workers, he provided a devastating account of months of emotional abuse, physical intimidation, and his mother's complete failure to protect him. The boy's testimony, combined with Ryan's surveillance evidence, painted a picture of systematic child endangerment that made Lisa's supervised visits increasingly uncomfortable for everyone involved. 5 days after Tyler's hospitalization, Lisa sat in a budget motel room, the only accommodation she could afford with her limited access to cash, and realized the full scope of her situation. Her husband controlled every aspect of their financial life. Her lover had abandoned her the moment real consequences appeared. Her son viewed her as an enemy rather than a protector. Her social network had evaporated overnight. She'd traded a marriage to one of the most successful men in the county for an affair with a coward who'd fled at the first sign of trouble. And in doing so, she'd lost everything: her home, her security, her son, and her future. But Ryan wasn't finished. The third phase of his revenge was psychological warfare, designed to ensure his enemies understood exactly why they were being destroyed. Brad received daily reminders of his fall from grace, photos of his belongings being removed from the estate, notices of services being canceled, updates on legal proceedings. Derek's team made sure Brad saw exactly how comprehensively his life was being dismantled. Lisa's psychological torture was more subtle but equally devastating. Ryan arranged for her to witness Tyler's recovery, his return to the confident, happy boy he'd been before her affair began poisoning their home. She saw her son laughing with his father, excelling in school without the stress of home abuse, thriving in ways that made her absence not just irrelevant but beneficial. The message was clear: Tyler was better off without her. Ryan was stronger without her. The life she tried to destroy was flourishing in her absence, while her chosen path had led to isolation, poverty, and public shame. As the week ended, Ryan reviewed the results of his campaign with grim satisfaction. Brad Coleman, once a confident predator who'd terrorized a child and stolen another man's wife, was reduced to sleeping in his car and desperately calling family members who refused to answer. Lisa Mitchell, who'd chosen passion over responsibility and adultery over motherhood, was learning that choices had consequences that couldn't be charmed or manipulated away. But this was still only the siege phase of Ryan's war. The real battle was about to begin, and it would be fought not just for Tyler's custody and Ryan's property, but for the complete and permanent destruction of the people who dared to threaten his family. Ryan had always believed that mercy was a luxury he couldn't afford in business. In war, it was a weakness that could prove fatal. Lisa and Brad were about to discover that the man they'd underestimated wasn't just wealthy and successful. He was utterly without forgiveness for those who betrayed the people he loved. Chapter 5: The Reckoning. 3 weeks after Tyler's hospitalization, the legal machinery Ryan had set in motion reached full momentum. His family law attorney, Caroline Fisher, was a woman who'd built her reputation destroying abusive spouses and protecting children. She approached Lisa's case like a prosecutor seeking a death penalty conviction, methodical, relentless, and utterly without mercy. The surveillance evidence Derek had gathered created an overwhelming narrative of child endangerment and spousal betrayal. But Caroline's genius lay in how she'd arranged the evidence presentation. Rather than simply dumping everything at once, she'd structured the revelation to maximize psychological impact on both Lisa and her rapidly deteriorating legal team. Lisa's attorney, a family friend who'd agreed to represent her as a favor, withdrew from the case after the second evidence presentation. The man simply couldn't defend the indefensible, especially when Caroline began introducing audio recordings of Lisa explicitly choosing Brad's comfort over Tyler's safety. The recordings, captured by Ryan's hidden cameras, included Lisa telling Tyler to stop being dramatic after Brad had physically intimidated him, and her promise to send Tyler to military school if he caused problems for her relationship. By the 4th week, Lisa was representing herself, a disastrous decision that Ryan had anticipated and encouraged. Her emotional instability in court, combined with her obvious inability to understand legal procedure, made her appear exactly as Caroline intended: an unfit mother whose poor judgment extended far beyond her marital infidelity. But Ryan's masterstroke was introducing evidence of financial theft that even Lisa's supporters couldn't defend. The surveillance footage clearly showed Lisa taking money from Tyler's college fund, money specifically designated for their son's education, to finance romantic getaways with Brad. The theft wasn't just morally reprehensible. It demonstrated a pattern of putting her affair above her child's future. Brad's situation had deteriorated even further. With no money, no home, and no social connections, he'd been forced to take a job at a budget motel, the same chain where Lisa was staying. The cosmic justice of this arrangement wasn't lost on anyone involved. The man who'd once claimed he was helping Lisa see what she deserved was now cleaning toilets and changing sheets to afford basic survival. Derek's continued surveillance revealed that Brad and Lisa's relationship was fracturing under pressure. Without the excitement of secrecy and the comfort of Ryan's unwitting financial support, their passion had curdled into mutual resentment. Brad blamed Lisa for the legal complications that had destroyed his life. Lisa blamed Brad for encouraging her betrayal of Tyler, conveniently forgetting her own enthusiastic participation. Their arguments, captured on audio recording, revealed the shallow, selfish nature of their connection. Brad called Lisa a stupid housewife who threw away everything for nothing. Lisa accused Brad of ruining her life and being a coward who runs when things get real. Neither showed any genuine remorse for the damage they'd inflicted on Tyler, only self-pity for the consequences they were facing. Ryan watched these recordings with cold satisfaction, but his focus remained on Tyler's recovery. The boy had thrived during his time away from Lisa's toxic influence. His grades improved dramatically. His confidence returned. Most importantly, he'd stopped flinching at unexpected sounds and looking over his shoulder for threats. During a father-son fishing trip, their first in months without the underlying tension of home conflict, Tyler finally opened up about the full extent of his mother's betrayal. "Dad," Tyler said, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "She stopped being my mom a long time ago, even before Brad. She just checked out. Like I was an inconvenience she was stuck with." Ryan felt his chest tighten with rage, but he kept his voice calm. "That's not your fault, son. Adults are responsible for their own choices." "I know, and I don't want her back." "Is that terrible?" The question broke Ryan's heart and hardened his resolve simultaneously. A 15-year-old boy shouldn't have to choose between his parents, but Lisa had forced that choice through her own actions. Tyler's decision to reject his mother wasn't born from manipulation or anger. It was a rational response to months of emotional abuse and physical endangerment. "No, Tyler, it's not terrible. It's self-preservation." That evening, Ryan made the call he'd been preparing for weeks. Caroline Fisher had been developing what she called the nuclear option, a legal strategy so comprehensive and devastating that it would permanently end any possibility of Lisa gaining custody or even unsupervised visitation rights. The strategy centered on proving Lisa's fundamental unfitness as a parent, not just through her recent actions, but through a pattern of emotional neglect that predated her affair. Caroline had interviewed Tyler's teachers, coaches, and friends' parents, building a case that Lisa had been checking out of motherhood for over a year. The evidence was damning. Teachers reported that Lisa had missed every parent conference for the past 18 months. Tyler's soccer coach revealed that Lisa had never attended a single game, despite claiming to be busy with family obligations. Friends' parents described a boy who increasingly avoided bringing classmates home, who seemed nervous about his mother's unpredictable moods, who'd started asking to stay at other houses rather than go home. But the most devastating evidence came from Tyler himself. In a private session with a court-appointed psychologist, the boy revealed that he'd been essentially raising himself for over a year. Lisa had stopped cooking family meals, stopped helping with homework, stopped showing interest in his life beyond what was necessary to maintain appearances. Tyler had learned to do his own laundry, prepare his own food, and handle his own transportation to activities because his mother was always busy with mysterious appointments and social obligations. The psychological evaluation concluded that Tyler had been suffering from emotional neglect long before the physical abuse began, and that his mother's affair was simply the culmination of a pattern of parental abandonment that had been building for months. Armed with this evidence, Caroline filed a motion for permanent sole custody with supervised visitation rights for Lisa, Visits that could be terminated if Tyler expressed discomfort or if Lisa showed any signs of attempting to manipulate their son. But Ryan had one final surprise for his wife. The house they'd shared, the mansion he'd designed and built as their family home, was actually titled in a complex trust structure that Caroline had helped him establish years earlier. The trust terms were clear. If either spouse was found guilty of child endangerment or financial theft, they forfeited all rights to the property. Lisa would not only lose custody of Tyler, she would be permanently barred from the home she'd violated with her affair. The house that had been built as a symbol of their family's success would now stand as a monument to the consequences of betrayal. As the legal walls closed around his enemies, Ryan felt the satisfaction of a perfectly executed plan. But he also felt something deeper. The peace that came from knowing his son was safe, his family was protected, and justice was being served without compromise or mercy. Lisa and Brad had gambled that Ryan's love for his family would make him vulnerable to exploitation. They'd failed to understand that love, when betrayed, could become the most ruthless force in the world. And they were about to learn that some battles, once begun, could only end in total victory or complete destruction. Ryan had chosen victory, and he'd built it to last forever. Chapter 6: The Collapse. The custody hearing that would determine Tyler's future took place on a gray October morning that perfectly matched the doom settling over Lisa's remaining hopes. She entered the courthouse alone, having been abandoned by her family, her friends, and even her public defender, who'd advised her to accept whatever terms Ryan's legal team offered. Brad was notably absent. 3 days earlier, he'd left Millbrook entirely, fleeing to parts unknown after Derek Torres had arranged for his former trust fund managers to inform local creditors about his precarious financial situation. Faced with mounting debts and the possibility of criminal charges related to Tyler's assault, Brad had chosen cowardice over accountability, a final betrayal that left Lisa completely isolated. Ryan sat with Caroline Fisher and Tyler, presenting a united front that spoke of family bonds forged stronger by adversity. Tyler, now 16 and more mature than his years, had chosen to attend the hearing despite having the option to wait elsewhere. He wanted to face his mother directly, to let her see exactly what her choices had cost their family. Judge Patricia Hendricks had reviewed the case file with growing disgust. A veteran of family court who'd seen every form of parental failure imaginable, she was particularly offended by cases where children were endangered not through poverty or desperation, but through selfishness and poor judgment by parents who had every advantage. The evidence presentation was devastating in its comprehensiveness. Caroline systematically destroyed any notion that Lisa was fit for motherhood, beginning with financial records showing the theft from Tyler's college fund, and escalating through months of documented neglect, and culminating in her complicity in Brad's physical abuse of their son. But the most damning evidence was Lisa's own voice, captured on Ryan's surveillance system, as she prioritized Brad's comfort over Tyler's safety again and again. The recordings played in the silent courtroom revealed a woman who not only failed to protect her child, but had actively chosen his abuser over him repeatedly. When given the opportunity to defend herself, Lisa's performance was catastrophic. Her attempts to minimize Tyler's injuries fell flat when medical records were introduced. Her claims that she'd been manipulated by Brad crumbled when recordings of her enthusiastic participation in planning Tyler's punishment were played. Her tearful pleas for another chance were undermined by Tyler's own testimony about her pattern of neglect and abandonment. Tyler's appearance before the judge was the hearing's pivotal moment. The boy spoke with quiet dignity about his mother's transformation from protector to threat, about the fear that had become his constant companion, about his relief at finally being safe in his father's custody. "Your Honor," Tyler said, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of his words, "I don't want my mother to have custody or even unsupervised visits. She stopped being my mom when she chose someone who hurt me over protecting me. I don't trust her anymore, and I don't think I ever will." The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. Ryan was awarded permanent sole custody with no possibility of revision until Tyler reached majority. Lisa's visitation rights were limited to 2 hours per month, supervised by a court-appointed monitor, and only if Tyler agreed to the visits. The judge also imposed a restraining order prohibiting Lisa from coming within 500 feet of Tyler's school, activities, or friends' homes. But Judge Hendricks saved her harshest words for last. "Mrs. Mitchell, you have failed in the most fundamental responsibility of parenthood, protecting your child from harm. Your choices have demonstrated a complete lack of judgment, morality, and maternal instinct. This court finds you unfit for parenthood and hopes that your son can overcome the trauma you've inflicted upon him." The gavel's final bang echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, officially ending the family that Lisa had destroyed through her selfishness and betrayal. Outside the courthouse, Lisa made one final attempt to reach her son. Ignoring the restraining order that wouldn't officially take effect for 24 hours, she approached Tyler as he walked with Ryan toward their car. "Tyler, please," she begged, grabbing his arm with desperate fingers. "I'm still your mother. I love you. I made mistakes, but—" Tyler pulled away from her touch, his expression cold with the kind of finality that comes from too much pain and disappointment. "No," he said simply. "You stopped being my mother when you chose him over me. You're nothing to me now." The words hit Lisa like physical blows, driving her to her knees on the courthouse steps as Tyler walked away without looking back. Ryan paused for a moment, looking down at the woman who'd once been his wife, who'd once been the mother of his child, who'd once been the center of his world. "You did this to yourself," he said quietly, his voice devoid of any emotion beyond cold statement of fact. "You chose Brad over Tyler. You chose an affair over your family. You chose betrayal over loyalty. These are the consequences of those choices." Lisa looked up at him with tear-streaked makeup and desperate eyes. "Ryan, please. I know I made mistakes, but—" "Mistakes?" Ryan's voice carried a hint of the rage that burned beneath his controlled exterior. "You didn't make mistakes, Lisa. You made choices. You chose to steal from your son's college fund. You chose to endanger his safety. You chose to protect the man who assaulted him. Every single decision was a conscious choice to put your selfish desires above your child's welfare." He knelt down beside her, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "You want to know the real tragedy? Tyler's better off without you. He's happier, healthier, and safer because you're not in his life. That's your legacy. Being a burden your own son is relieved to be rid of." Ryan stood and walked away, leaving Lisa collapsed on the courthouse steps, finally understanding the full magnitude of what she'd lost. She'd gambled their family's future on an affair with a coward who'd abandoned her at the first sign of trouble. She'd chosen momentary passion over permanent love, and the price had been everything that truly mattered. That evening, Ryan and Tyler ate dinner in their home, truly their home now, with no shadow of betrayal hanging over their table. Tyler talked about his plans for college, his goals for his senior year of high school, his excitement about life possibilities that no longer included fear or anxiety about his safety. "Dad," Tyler said as they cleaned up together, "I know this has been hard on you too. Losing Mom, I mean." Ryan considered his words carefully. "Son, I didn't lose your mother. She lost herself. The woman I married, the woman who gave birth to you. She disappeared long before this all came to light. What I lost was an illusion of someone who didn't exist anymore." Tyler nodded with understanding beyond his years. "I think I lost her even earlier than you did. Maybe that's why this doesn't hurt as much as it should." That night, Ryan stood in his study, looking out at the property he'd built to be their family's legacy. The house stood strong and beautiful, its foundation solid despite the storms that had tested its structure. Like the home he designed and constructed, his relationship with Tyler had been built to withstand any assault. Lisa and Brad had believed they could destroy what Ryan had built through deception and manipulation. They'd failed to understand that true strength came not from perfection, but from the ability to cut away corrupted elements before they could cause systemic failure. Ryan had built his revenge the same way he built everything else, methodically, completely, and designed to last forever. His enemies were destroyed, his son was safe, and his future was secure. The foundation of their new life was solid, and nothing would ever threaten it again. The war was over, and Ryan Mitchell had achieved total victory. Chapter 7: Phoenix Rising. 6 months after the courthouse steps confrontation, Ryan and Tyler had settled into a rhythm of life that felt more like partnership than traditional father-son relationship. Tyler, now 17 and accelerated in his studies, was already receiving scholarship offers from prestigious universities. The trauma of his mother's betrayal had transformed into strength and independence that impressed everyone who knew him. Ryan's business had expanded beyond his wildest projections. Word of his character during the custody battle, his protection of Tyler, and his principled handling of Lisa's betrayal had earned him respect throughout their community and beyond. Mitchell Construction was now handling projects in 3 states, with a waiting list of clients who specifically requested Ryan's personal involvement. But success brought its own challenges. Lisa, reduced to working minimum wage jobs and living in subsidized housing, had begun a campaign of harassment that tested the boundaries of her restraining order. She would appear at the edges of Tyler's school events, always just far enough away to avoid arrest, but close enough to make her presence known. She sent letters to Tyler's friends' parents, pleading for their intervention in reuniting her with her son. She even attempted to contact college recruiters, spinning elaborate lies about being wrongfully denied access to her child. Derek Torres, who'd remained on retainer as a security consultant, documented each violation and near violation with methodical precision. But Ryan began to realize that restraining orders and legal boundaries meant nothing to someone who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. The situation escalated when Lisa appeared at Tyler's regional soccer championship, somehow obtaining credentials as a freelance photographer. She positioned herself on the sidelines, camera in hand, clicking away as Tyler played the game of his life. When security tried to remove her, she claimed First Amendment protections and threatened to sue for discrimination. Tyler, focused on the match, didn't notice his mother's presence until halftime. When he spotted her across the field, his concentration shattered. The confident young man who'd faced down courtrooms and custody hearings suddenly looked like the frightened 15-year-old who'd whispered his fears to his father in a hospital room. Ryan watched his son's performance suffer in the second half, saw the anxiety return to Tyler's movements, witnessed the psychological damage that Lisa's mere presence could inflict. That night, Tyler had his first nightmare in months, waking up screaming about being chased by someone he couldn't escape. "She's never going to stop, is she?" Tyler asked over breakfast, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and renewed fear. "She's going to follow me to college, show up at my job, try to ruin everything good in my life because she can't accept that I don't want her there." Ryan looked at his son, brilliant, talented, traumatized Tyler who deserved a future free from the shadow of his mother's obsession, and made a decision that would define the final chapter of his revenge. "No, son. She's going to stop. Permanently." Derek's investigation into Lisa's current circumstances revealed a woman spiraling toward complete breakdown. She'd been fired from 3 jobs for erratic behavior and constant phone calls to lawyers about getting her son back. She'd been evicted twice for disturbing neighbors with her sobbing and shouting. She'd even been arrested for a minor theft at a drugstore, though charges were dropped when security cameras showed her mental state clearly warranted mental health intervention rather than prosecution. But most telling was what Derek discovered about her obsession with Tyler. Lisa's subsidized apartment was wallpapered with photographs of her son, images printed from his social media accounts, pictures taken from her surveillance of his activities, even photos stolen from the homes of his friends' families. She'd created a shrine to the child who'd rejected her, complete with birthday presents never given and letters never sent. The psychological evaluation Derek commissioned through a private clinic painted a picture of someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. Lisa wasn't just grieving the loss of her family. She constructed an elaborate fantasy where Tyler was being poisoned against her by Ryan's manipulation, where their reunion was inevitable once she proved her love, where she was the victim of a vast conspiracy rather than the architect of her own destruction. "She's dangerous," Derek reported during a late-night meeting at Ryan's house. "Not necessarily violent, but completely irrational. She's convinced herself that Tyler secretly wants her back, that he's being held against his will. Every restraining order violation, every boundary she crosses, she justifies as fighting for her son. She's going to escalate until someone gets hurt. Ryan had built his success on his ability to see problems 3 moves ahead and solve them before they became disasters. Lisa's deteriorating mental state and escalating obsession represented a threat to Tyler's safety and future that couldn't be managed through legal means alone. The solution, when it came to him, was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. Lisa's obsession with Tyler was the last foundation holding up her crumbling psyche. Remove that foundation, and the entire structure would collapse, completely, permanently, and irreversibly. Ryan's plan began with a carefully orchestrated revelation designed to shatter Lisa's remaining grip on reality. He discovered that Lisa had been telling everyone, social workers, employers, neighbors, that Tyler was being brainwashed against her, that her son still loved her but was too afraid of Ryan's influence to express it. Derek arranged for Lisa to receive a package containing Tyler's private journal, a journal Ryan had encouraged his son to keep as part of his therapy process. The entries, spanning several months, documented Tyler's genuine feelings about his mother in his own handwriting, in his own words, without any possibility of outside influence. The journal revealed a young man who didn't miss his mother, who felt relief at her absence, who worried that her attempts to contact him were evidence of mental instability that might threaten his safety. Tyler wrote about his plans for college as an escape from her surveillance, about his decision to change his name legally when he turned 18, about his hope that she would find some way to move on with her life that doesn't involve me. Most devastatingly, Tyler had written about the difference between loving someone and being obligated to someone. I feel sorry for her. One entry read, "The way I'd feel sorry for any stranger who'd lost everything through their own bad choices. But I don't love her anymore." You can't love someone who hurts you and then blames you for being hurt. I don't think she's evil, but I think she's sick, and I can't fix her by pretending she didn't break our family. The journal's final entry, written just days before Lisa received it, was a meditation on forgiveness and moving forward. Dad says forgiveness doesn't mean letting people hurt you again. I forgive Mom for being weak and making terrible choices, but that doesn't mean I want her in my life. Some things can't be fixed, and some relationships can't be rebuilt. I'm okay with that. I'm happy without her. Ryan had the journal delivered with a note explaining that Tyler had asked Derek to share these private thoughts so Lisa could understand that her son's rejection wasn't temporary anger or outside manipulation. It was a mature decision based on careful consideration of their history together. The psychological impact was immediate and catastrophic. Lisa's carefully constructed fantasy that Tyler secretly wanted her back crumbled in the face of his genuine, unmanipulated feelings. The realization that her son didn't miss her, didn't love her, and didn't want her in his life sent her into a complete psychological breakdown. She was found 3 days later by her landlord, sitting in her apartment surrounded by torn photographs and burned letters, completely catatonic. When paramedics arrived, she was clutching Tyler's journal and mumbling incoherently about losing everything and having nothing left. The psychiatric hold that followed lasted 30 days. When Lisa was finally released, she was a broken shell of her former self, medicated, compliant, and utterly defeated. The fire that had driven her obsession with Tyler had been extinguished, replaced by a hollow acceptance of her situation. She moved quietly to a different state, taking a job in a factory where no one knew her history. She never attempted to contact Tyler again, never violated the restraining order, never appeared at his events. She'd finally accepted what Ryan had been trying to teach her for months. Some consequences are permanent, and some choices can never be undone. Tyler, meanwhile, flourished in ways that exceeded even Ryan's hopes. Free from the anxiety of his mother's harassment, he threw himself into his senior year with enthusiasm and confidence. His college applications were stellar, his scholarship offers numerous, his future bright with possibility. "I feel like I can breathe again," Tyler told his father as they worked together on a construction project during spring break. "For the first time since this all started, I'm not looking over my shoulder, waiting for her to appear." Ryan watched his son, confident, capable, unburdened by the toxicity that had once threatened to define his life, and felt the deep satisfaction that came from a job completed to perfection. He'd set out to protect Tyler and destroy the people who'd threatened their family. Both objectives had been achieved with ruthless efficiency. Lisa was neutralized, her obsession cured through the amputation of hope. Brad had vanished entirely, his privileged life reduced to whatever survival he could manage in whatever distant city had accepted his exile. Tyler was safe, thriving, and free to build whatever future he chose without the shadow of his mother's betrayal hanging over his accomplishments. The foundation Ryan had built, both literal and metaphorical, had proven strong enough to withstand any assault. His family of 2 was more solid than his family of 3 had ever been, forged in adversity and strengthened by the removal of its weakest, most corrupted elements. As they worked side by side, Ryan realized that his revenge had achieved something beyond mere destruction of his enemies. It had created space for something better to grow, something pure and strong that could never be compromised by betrayal or weakened by disloyalty. He'd built the perfect life from the ashes of his marriage's collapse, and nothing would ever threaten it again. Chapter 8. The Price of Victory. 2 years later, Tyler graduated as valedictorian of his high school class, accepting a full scholarship to MIT that would set him up for a career in engineering. The graduation ceremony was a triumph that Ryan savored not just as a proud father, but as the architect of a victory that had required sacrifice, precision, and uncompromising commitment to justice. Derek Torres, who'd become more friend than employee over the years of their collaboration, sat with Ryan in the auditorium as Tyler delivered his valedictorian speech. The young man spoke about overcoming adversity, about the importance of loyalty and character, about building foundations strong enough to support any dream. He never mentioned his mother by name, but everyone who knew their story understood the subtext of his words. "You did it," Derek murmured as Tyler received his diploma to thunderous applause. "That kid is going to conquer the world." Ryan nodded, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from seeing a plan executed to perfection. Tyler was safe, successful, and free from the toxicity that had once threatened to define his life. The boy had been transformed from victim to victor, and that transformation was permanent. But victory, Ryan had learned, came with its own complexities. In the weeks following graduation, as Tyler prepared for college, Ryan found himself confronting the reality of his success. He'd achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish. Tyler was thriving, his enemies were destroyed, his family was secure. Yet something felt incomplete, as if the very totality of his victory had left a void where the mission had once provided purpose. Caroline Fisher, the attorney who'd helped orchestrate Lisa's legal destruction, visited Ryan's office for what she called a post-mortem review of their campaign. Over coffee and legal briefs, she summarized the final status of everyone involved in Tyler's trauma. "Lisa's completely out of the picture," Caroline reported with professional satisfaction. "Still living in Ohio, working at a factory, no social media presence, no attempt at contact. For all practical purposes, she ceased to exist as far as Tyler's concerned." And Brad? Vanished. Derek's contacts suggest he's somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, possibly working under an assumed name. His family's completely disowned him. The trust fund termination was permanent, and they've made it clear he's persona non grata at all family events. He's effectively been erased from his own life. Ryan listened to this summary of total victory with the kind of methodical attention he brought to construction reports. Every objective had been achieved. Every enemy had been neutralized. Every threat to Tyler's future had been permanently eliminated. "You know," Caroline said, studying Ryan's expression, "most people in your situation would be celebrating. You won completely, not just legal custody, but total victory over everyone who wronged your family. Why do you look like you're attending a funeral?" The question haunted Ryan through the summer as Tyler prepared for college. He'd built his revenge with the same meticulous planning he brought to his construction projects. And like those projects, it had been completed exactly as designed. But construction projects, once finished, served a purpose beyond their building. They became homes where families grew, businesses where communities thrived, structures that supported life and growth for generations. His revenge, perfectly executed though it was, served only destruction. It had eliminated threats and punished betrayal. But what did it build in return? Tyler, perhaps sensing his father's introspection, broached the subject during one of their evening walks around the property Ryan had designed as their family legacy. "Dad, you know I'm grateful for everything you did to protect me, right? Getting me away from Mom and Brad, making sure they couldn't hurt me anymore. I understand why you had to do all of that." But Ryan sensed the qualification coming. "But sometimes I wonder if you went further than you had to. I mean, Mom needed to lose custody, needed to face consequences for what she did. But destroying her completely? Making sure she ended up broken and medicated and alone? That feels like more than justice." Ryan considered his son's words carefully. Tyler had inherited his analytical mind along with his moral center, and his question deserved honest consideration rather than defensive justification. "You think I went too far? I think you won so completely that there wasn't anything left of her to rebuild with. And maybe that was necessary. Maybe she would have kept being dangerous if you'd left her any hope or dignity or resources. But it also means I have to live knowing that my father is capable of destroying people so thoroughly that they cease to exist as functional human beings." The observation hit Ryan harder than any criticism or condemnation could have. Tyler wasn't condemning his methods. He was grappling with the reality of what those methods revealed about Ryan's character and what that meant for their relationship going forward. "Are you afraid of me?" Ryan asked quietly. Tyler was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful rather than fearful. "No, I'm not afraid of you. But I understand you better now. I understand that you're someone who doesn't believe in half measures or second chances when it comes to betrayal. That's not necessarily bad. It's kept me safe, and it's probably served you well in business. But it's also absolute. Final. There's no forgiveness in your system, no possibility of redemption for people who cross you." Ryan realized that Tyler was confronting the same reality that had been nagging at him since the graduation ceremony. He'd won their war so completely that he'd revealed aspects of his own character that couldn't be unseen or unknown. Tyler now understood that his father was capable of ruthless, systematic destruction of anyone who threatened their family, including, potentially, Tyler himself if he ever betrayed that trust. "Does that change how you see me?" "It makes me see you more clearly," Tyler replied. "I love you, Dad, and I'm grateful for everything you've done. But I also understand that your love comes with conditions, and that those conditions are non-negotiable. I think that's probably made me a better person, knowing that loyalty and character matter so much to you that you'd sacrifice anything to protect them." That night, Ryan sat alone in his study, contemplating the final cost of his victory. He'd protected Tyler and eliminated every threat to their family, but he'd also revealed the depths of his own capacity for revenge. Tyler would carry that knowledge with him to college, into his career, into his own relationships. He would always understand that his father's love, while absolute, was also conditional on continued loyalty and character. Perhaps that was appropriate. Perhaps Tyler was better off understanding that love without boundaries was vulnerable to exploitation, that unconditional forgiveness invited repeated betrayal, that mercy could be a weakness that endangered the innocent. Ryan had built his life and his family on the principle that loyalty earned loyalty and betrayal earned destruction. He'd applied that principle with scientific precision to eliminate Lisa and Brad, and the results spoke for themselves. Tyler was safe, successful, and free to build whatever future he chose. But Tyler was also shaped by witnessing that principle in action. He would never take loyalty for granted because he'd seen what happened to those who betrayed it. He would never assume forgiveness was automatic because he'd witnessed the permanent consequences of lost trust. The boy going to MIT in the fall was not the same child who'd whispered his fears in a hospital room 2 years earlier. Tyler had been forged in the fire of his family's destruction and his father's revenge, emerging stronger but also harder, more protective of himself, more aware of the potential for human betrayal. Ryan wondered if that was victory or tragedy, protection or damage. Perhaps it was both. The necessary cost of ensuring Tyler's survival in a world where predators like Brad existed, and where even mothers could choose selfishness over their children's safety. As summer ended and Tyler prepared to leave for college, Ryan realized that his revenge had been more than just justice. It had been education. Tyler understood now that some people couldn't be trusted, that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, that some threats had to be eliminated completely to ensure they never returned. Whether that understanding would serve Tyler well or haunt him remained to be seen. But Ryan had no regrets about the lessons he'd taught or the methods he'd used to teach them. In a world where loyalty was rare and betrayal was common, Tyler would be prepared for whatever challenges awaited him. The foundation Ryan had built would support his son for generations to come, strong enough to bear any weight and resistant to any assault. And Tyler, shaped by witnessing its construction, would know how to build foundations of his own that could never be compromised or corrupted. The victory was complete, the price was paid, and the future was secure. That was enough. Chapter 9, Legacy. 5 years after Tyler's high school graduation, Ryan stood in the MIT auditorium watching his son receive his master's degree in structural engineering. At 23, Tyler had already been recruited by 3 major firms and had patents pending on innovations that could revolutionize earthquake-resistant construction. The traumatized 15-year-old who'd whispered his fears in a hospital room had become a confident young man poised to change the world. Derek Torres, now officially retired but still Ryan's closest friend, sat beside him as they watched Tyler cross the stage. "That kid's going to build structures that'll stand for centuries," Derek observed with pride. "Just like his old man." Ryan nodded, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from seeing a project completed exactly as designed. But this project, Tyler's transformation from victim to victor, was more than just personal success. It was a legacy that would ripple through generations, a foundation so strong that it could support not just Tyler's future, but the futures of his children and grandchildren. After the ceremony, Tyler introduced Ryan to his girlfriend, Sarah Chun, a brilliant architecture student he'd been dating for 2 years. Ryan had met her before, but watching them together at graduation, he saw something that filled him with both pride and relief. Tyler had chosen a partner who shared his values of loyalty, integrity, and mutual respect. "Mr. Mitchell," Sarah said as they talked over dinner, "Tyler's told me about what happened with his mother. I just want you to know that I understand why you did what you had to do to protect him. Tyler's the most loyal, honest person I've ever met, and I think that's partly because he learned early what betrayal costs." Ryan studied this young woman who clearly loved his son and seemed to understand the complexities of their family history. "Tyler's lucky to have found someone who sees his character clearly." "We're both lucky," Sarah replied, her hand finding Tyler's across the table. "We've both learned not to take loyalty for granted." That evening, as they walked through Boston's historic streets, Tyler brought up a subject that had been years in the making. "Dad, I've been thinking about starting my own firm after I worked for someone else for a few years. Mitchell and Associates Engineering. I want to build on what you've created, but in my own field." Ryan felt a surge of pride, tempered by practical concerns. Engineering's different from construction. More regulated, more conservative. You'll be competing with firms that have been established for decades. "I know, but I've got advantages they don't. I understand construction from the ground up because you taught me. I understand that reputation is everything because I watch you build yours. And I understand that loyalty and character matter more than profit margins because you showed me what happens when people choose differently." Tyler paused, his expression growing serious. "I also understand that success means having the ability to protect the people you love. That lesson cost our family a lot, but it was worth learning." Ryan realized that Tyler had absorbed not just the skills and knowledge he'd tried to impart, but the deeper principles that had guided Ryan's entire approach to life and business. The boy had learned that strength came from preparation, that security came from competence, and that the ability to protect family was the most important success of all. "There's something else," Tyler continued. "Sarah and I are engaged. We're planning a small wedding next spring, just family and close friends. I wanted to ask you to be my best man." The request hit Ryan with unexpected emotion. Tyler wasn't just asking him to stand up at his wedding. He was affirming that their relationship had survived the crucible of revenge and emerged stronger. Despite witnessing Ryan's capacity for ruthless destruction, Tyler still trusted him, still loved him, still wanted him as the central figure in his most important life moments. "I'd be honored," Ryan managed, his voice thick with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. Over the following months, as wedding plans developed and Tyler began his career with a prestigious Boston firm, Ryan found himself reflecting on the full scope of what he'd accomplished. Lisa and Brad's destruction had been comprehensive and permanent. They'd ceased to exist as threats or even as meaningful presences in Tyler's life. But the positive construction that had emerged from their elimination was even more impressive. Tyler had developed into exactly the kind of man Ryan had hoped to raise: competent, principled, successful, and strong enough to protect his own family when the time came. Sarah was clearly a partner worthy of Tyler's character, someone who understood both his strengths and the experiences that had shaped them. The engineering firm Tyler worked for had already promoted him twice, recognizing not just his technical skills, but his leadership potential and absolute reliability. His colleagues spoke of him as someone they could trust completely, someone whose word was his bond, someone who would never compromise integrity for convenience. Caroline Fisher visited Ryan's office that winter to discuss the final dissolution of the trust funds that had been established during the custody battle. All legal matters related to Lisa and Tyler's relationship had been permanently settled, with no possibility of future complications. "You know," Caroline said as they wrapped up the paperwork, "I've handled a lot of custody cases over the years, but I've never seen one with such a complete resolution. Most divorced families spend decades dealing with ongoing conflicts, appeals, violations. Your situation was resolved so thoroughly that it's as if Lisa never existed as far as the legal system is concerned." Ryan considered this assessment. Sometimes complete solutions are the only lasting solutions. True, but they're also rare. Most people don't have the combination of resources, patience, and ruthlessness necessary to achieve what you achieved. Tyler's lucky his father was willing to go as far as necessary to protect him. As winter turned to spring and Tyler's wedding approached, Ryan realized that his legacy was secure in ways he'd never anticipated. He'd set out to protect his son and destroy his enemies, but he'd ended up creating something far more valuable: a new generation that understood the principles necessary for lasting success and security. Tyler's wedding was held at the family home Ryan had designed and built, the same house that had been violated by Lisa's affair and reclaimed through his revenge. Watching Tyler and Sarah exchange vows in the garden where Tyler had played as a child, Ryan felt the deep satisfaction that came from seeing a structure used for its intended purpose. During his best man speech, Tyler spoke about the lessons he'd learned from his father, lessons about loyalty, integrity, the importance of building strong foundations, and the necessity of protecting the people you love from those who would harm them. "My father taught me that some things are worth fighting for," Tyler said, his voice carrying across the assembled guests, "and that when you fight for those things, you fight to win completely. He also taught me that the best victory isn't just defeating your enemies. It's building something so strong that enemies can never threaten it again." Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Tyler pulled Ryan aside for a private conversation. "Dad, I want you to know that I understand what you did for me. All of it. The investigation, the legal strategy, the systematic destruction of Mom and Brad. I understand that you went to those lengths because you love me and because you understood they'd never stop being a threat otherwise." Ryan waited, sensing that Tyler had more to say. "I also want you to know that I hope I never have to do what you did. Not because it was wrong, it wasn't given the circumstances, but because it required you to become someone harder and more ruthless than you might have been otherwise. That's a price you paid to protect me, and I'll never forget that sacrifice." Tyler paused, his expression growing thoughtful. "But if anyone ever threatens Sarah or our children when we have them, I hope I have the strength to be as ruthless as you were. Because I understand now that mercy toward people who hurt your family isn't virtue. It's weakness that enables more harm." Ryan felt a profound sense of completion hearing these words. Tyler had learned the most important lesson of all, that protecting family required not just love, but the willingness to do whatever was necessary to ensure that protection was absolute and permanent. As the evening wound down and the newlyweds prepared to leave for their honeymoon, Ryan stood alone in his study, looking out at the property he'd built as a family legacy. The foundation he'd constructed, both literal and metaphorical, had proven strong enough to support Tyler's transformation from victim to victor, from traumatized child to confident man, ready to build his own family. Lisa and Brad were ghosts now, their destruction so complete that they existed only as cautionary tales in Tyler's memory. They learned too late that Ryan Mitchell didn't believe in half measures or second chances when it came to threats against his family. They discovered that mercy was a luxury he couldn't afford when his son's safety was at stake. But their destruction had created space for something beautiful to grow. Tyler's marriage to Sarah, his flourishing career, his plan for children who would carry Ryan's principles into the next generation. The victory was complete not just because his enemies were destroyed, but because their elimination had allowed goodness to flourish without the constant threat of corruption. As Ryan turned off the lights in his study and headed upstairs to bed, he felt the deep peace that came from a life's work completed to perfection. He'd built structures that would stand for generations, raised a son who understood the true meaning of strength and loyalty, and created a legacy that would protect his family long after he was gone. The foundation was strong, the construction was complete, and the future was secure. Tyler would carry forward the lessons he'd learned, building his own empire on principles that could never be compromised or corrupted. And if anyone ever threatened Tyler's family, they would discover that the capacity for absolute, ruthless protection had been passed down from father to son, a legacy of strength that would endure for generations to come. The story was finished.